So, this will be my sermon for the Intro to Preaching class at the Interdenominational Theological Center. My name is Jimmy Strong, and our text today will come from Daniel 3. And this is a pretty familiar text. It focuses on the three Hebrew boys. And we all know the story of the fiery furnace, but I think there is a lot of lessons to be learned in that story of the Bible. So, if we can focus our attention to Daniel 3, we're going to do verses 14 through 18. And just to give a background on how we got here in Daniel 3. We all know the three Hebrew boys were held captive in Babylon after their native land of Judah was overtaken by the Babylonians. So the Babylonians were a military power at the time. They overtook Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple. They killed thousands of people. And they took some of the brightest and smartest young men back to Babylon with them to train them in the ways of Babylonian culture and the Babylonian ways. So the three Hebrew boys found themselves up against a wall and facing the fiery furnace. So they were facing the fiery furnace because they refused to bow to an image or a statue of the king. King Nebuchadnezzar set up a golden image, and he wanted everyone in the land of Babylon to bow to that image, including Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. So we find ourselves in verse 14 when the Chaldeans told King Nebuchadnezzar that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego would not bow to this image. So let's look at verse 14 here. Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not serve ye my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Now, if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and declamer, and all the kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So what happened? The Chaldeans told on Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. They take him to King Nebuchadnezzar, and he gives them another chance. He said, you know what? I'm going to give you another chance. We're going to play this music again, and if you fall on your face and worship this statue this time, your life will be spared. But if not, you'll be thrown into a fiery furnace. Let's continue reading. And he says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said unto King, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from a fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Look at verse 15. King Nebuchadnezzar asks, Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Verse 17. The three Hebrew boys answer back and it says, The God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace. And that is what I wanted to speak on today. The subject today is going to be Jesus, our deliverer. Have you ever found yourself up against a situation where it seems like you had no way out? I'm talking about those situations where you've tried everything. You've been praying, you've been fasting, you've been living as righteously as possible, but still you find yourself up against the wall, and it seems like your circumstance and your situation is not getting any better. That's exactly the same situation that the three Hebrew boys found themselves in. If we look at the three Hebrew boys, these are three Hebrew boys that have been doing right by God. They've been talking to God. They've been praying to God. They found favor with God in chapters 1 and 2, and they were able to interpret dreams. Also, they've been refusing to bow down to any other gods of Babylon. They've been only worshiping their one true God. But still, they found themselves up against a fiery furnace. And it seems that when we find ourselves up against our fiery furnace, our situations, whether it may be any personal struggles, depression, it could be a loss of a job, it could be health issues, anything like that, where we've found ourselves up against a wall and we question God, how did we get here when we've been living right and doing everything right in your eyes and trying to be righteous? Oftentimes when we're up against those situations, we question God. But as you see in the text, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they never questioned God. They stood firm on their faith, and they never gave up on God because they knew that God could deliver them. And I believe as they went towards this fiery furnace, I believe there's three things that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego had in mind that kept them going and kept their foundation in play. So those three things are, the first one, I believe that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego realized that they may not necessarily have been able to see God physically in their situation, but they knew he was there. And what I mean by that is, as I read the text, after Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego are thrown into the fiery furnace, I noticed that nowhere in the text did it say that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego saw Jesus in the furnace with them. It says that King Nebuchadnezzar looked into the furnace and he saw four people, Meshach, Shadrach, Abednego, and the Son of God. But nowhere in the text does it say that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego saw the fourth person in that furnace. But they knew he was there. Even though they could not see him in that furnace, they know it had to be God, because only God can deliver you from a situation where it seems so unsurmountable and so like you're up against the wall and you're about to die, but only God can come into that situation and see you through. So they may not have been able to see him in that furnace, but they knew he was there. And they knew they served a God that would help see them through if he wanted to, and if he was, because he was definitely able to. So my first point is that Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego may not have seen God in there, but they knew that God was in there because only God could have saved them through that fiery furnace. Point two. Point two plays off of point one. So as I said earlier, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego did not see Jesus. Nowhere in the text did it say he saw Jesus. They saw Jesus in that fiery furnace. But there's one person that did. So that brings me to my second point. The fiery furnace may not be for you. And what I mean by that is, your situation that you're going through may not be for you. It may be that the people around you need to see God work you through your situation in such a way that you're delivered, and it can only be God that did it. So Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego didn't see God, but there's one person that did see God, King Nebuchadnezzar. So the fiery furnace was not for Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. The fiery furnace was for King Nebuchadnezzar so he can get to know who God was, right? Because as we recall in the text, King Nebuchadnezzar said, "Who is this God that can deliver you from a fiery furnace that's 7 times as hot as any other furnace that I've ever heated up before, that's so hot that the very people that's going to throw you in that fire, they're going to burn up just trying to throw you in there?" And he got his question answered. It says King Nebuchadnezzar looked into that fiery furnace and he saw Jesus. So while the three Hebrew boys may not have seen Jesus in that fire, the person that fire was meant for to bring them closer to Christ and God, Nebuchadnezzar, he was able to see God through their situation. Okay, third point. I know my time is wrapping up here. My third point is that we serve a God that can meet you in any situation, any circumstance. I don't care what kind of circumstance you're up against. I don't care how bad it seems. You can't use your natural eyes. You must use the eyes of God. We walk by faith and not by sight. What it looks like is not always what it is. We must realize that we serve a God that will meet us where we are. No situation is so dismal that God can't deliver us through it. We serve a God that is omnipotent, all powerful, so that means he can do anything and do it in our favor. So I ask you today, as I wrap up, if there's anything you're dealing with and you're trying to deal with it alone and you think that God can help you in this situation and you think that nothing's ever going to change for you, I ask you today to realize that God is right there with you, just like he was with the 3 Hebrew boys in the fire. They may not have necessarily known or seen him, but he was right there with them the entire time. The fire may not necessarily be for you. Your situation may be so that the people around you, your friends and family, can draw closer to God as a result of seeing God take you through that situation and deliver you. Have a good evening.